This is Roger Thunder, the Desert Shaman. Today's discussion will be entitled Magical Passes. Magical Passes. Magical passes are exercises that shamans use to take journeys and to do things like move their assemblage point and to have a form of lucid dreaming or exploring other worlds made up of mostly of energy. Okay, so we have dreams, and we have what is called the normal dream, like what we dream at night. And then there's other kinds of dreams that shamans discovered. And they discovered this by observing the luminous sphere, especially when people were sleeping, in a so-called dream state. What they observed was an assemblage point where all perception is fed. It's kind of located in between the shoulder blades and a couple of feet back out. That's your assemblage point. That's kind of like where you plug into the wall socket, where you plug into the universal ether, the energy. The flow of energy around us comes in through a certain point. And that certain point is a point where our perceptions, depending on the position of the assemblage point, our perception, this forms our perceptions and our dream worlds or our lucid dreaming or whatever. So what shamans observed was that when a person was sleeping, this assemblage point kind of floated around the luminous sphere. Floated around the luminous sphere in different positions, okay? And whatever position that it was in could be another world, another reality, another perception, another dream. Because it's all a dream anyway. So what happens when we dream? We have all kinds of phantasmagorical images, usually brought to us from whatever reality or whatever life that we're living in. We have imagery that we project out during dreams. And this imagery is, again, one of our own making, projections from all kinds of things that are in the subconscious or that have to do with this reality. So what happens when you move the assemblage point? The assemblage point can be moved. Let me emphasize that. The assemblage point where we perceive, which is kind of where we're plugged into perception and to the ether and everything, it can be moved. And so the reason that shamans understood that it could be moved, because they would see this assemblage point floating around on the luminous sphere. We are all luminous spheres. And we all have energy surrounding us, and sometimes we have encrusted energy from different, or stagnated energy that surrounds us from different traumas or different dreams or different situations that happen to us in this reality. But anyway, the assemblage point floats around, and there is approximately 600 different worlds or 600 different points in the luminous sphere to where this assemblage point can move to, can go to. I'm going to keep this video short because I know it's deep. Something that you can just reflect on. We'll get into assemblage points more in future videos. This is the first time I've touched upon the assemblage point and the magical passes. Now, what is a magical pass? A magical pass is almost like Tai Chi, or a form of exercises, or a form of putting your body in different positions and moving your hands certain ways. And using this technique in almost a nonchalant way, even every day throughout your life, just moving in certain ways. Now, the shamans sometimes would do this, and they'd move a certain way. It was almost like they were stretching or moving a certain way, and they would crack a bone. A bone, it's almost like bone cracking, moving a certain way to crack a certain bone. A lot of this was done. And it had to do with the term magical passes, which are body positions which allow you to access certain forms of energy. It's all about energy. I've always said this. Everything is about energy. It's all about energy. So in the magical passes, these different exercises that shamans use, there's ways to do certain things that are beneficial to you, or that give you a different viewpoint, or that give you a different worldview, or to go to another world. A lot of this stuff is shrouded in secrecy, and you're only going to get what I am able to give you from my knowledge of it, and having experienced it myself. So one magical pass would be something to the effect of putting your arm back between your shoulder blades, okay, and grabbing the assemblage point and flinging it forward like you would a knife. It's almost like knife throwing. That's one magical pass that works very well. And there's others. There's all kinds of magical passes for moving your assemblage point around into one of these other positions. So what does that do? When you move your assemblage point, what does that do? Well, it gives you a slightly different angle, a slightly different worldview on the dream. It puts you in another realm. It puts you in another world. Now, scientists say there's 11 different dimensions, maybe even more. That's what just the scientists say, but shamans knew this stuff a long time ago. There are parallel worlds where there will be one me in one world, and another me in another world, and another me in another world. Parallel worlds. I'm kind of mixing two thoughts here together, but that's okay. I might give you some clarity. I hate mixing scientific thought with shamanistic thought, because the two just don't really go that well, because science is so far away from what's really happening here. So if you go by what the shamans say, the ancient shamans, the shamans of Mexico and that type of thing, especially the ones in Mexico, there's two types of dreams. There's ensonar and sonar. Sonar, ensonar. And there's suelo and ensuelo. These are two types of dreams, one being the normal dream and one being the shaman's dream. The shaman's dream is something that is very beneficial on an energetic level. Now, another thing that I want to mention here is that shamans were accessing these different worlds and these different dreams, and they found them very beneficial. They found them euphoric. They found them engaging. I mean, they really liked being in these different spaces, these different worlds, these different realities, these different lucid dreams. The problem is that they could go there for a while, but not long enough to make it beneficial to them. They would go there for just a few minutes or a few seconds or however long. They would go to these worlds, or they would go to these viewpoints, and they would experience it, but when they were experiencing it, they couldn't stay there long enough. They wanted to stay longer, so they developed these magical passes. They developed these exercises where you could hold an assemblage point for longer periods of time, because the assemblage point determined what world and what energy they were accessing at the time. So that assemblage point would be there, but it would have a tendency to snap back because we are so involved in ruts, like I was talking about yesterday. Actually, yesterday's video goes right along with this. It's kind of a precursor. The things I talk about in that video might be over people's heads, or they might not understand about the ritual and that type of thing, and the ruts and that type of thing. A rut to me, is a fixed assemblage point that it isn't being moved around, is not flexible, and I talked about flexibility in yesterday's video as well. So what shamans had to do is they had to develop certain exercises where they could move the assemblage point around and keep it in a certain fixed position so that they could stay in that particular world or realm, excuse me, or state of mind that they were in. So thus they created, like the magical pass that I just talked about, the one about grabbing the assemblage point and hurling it forward like a knife, and being able to practice this over and over until you felt the shift happen, the shift of and it's kind of a neat thing, because if you get stuck in a certain worldview, and if you get stuck at looking at the world in a certain way, you get stagnant, you get in a rut. You can do some of these magical passes, and there's a book that I might recommend called Magical Passes by Castaneda. Some have had different viewpoints about this book, being as it is a newer book, and probably, I think it's the last book that came out by Castaneda. I'm not sure. So these magical passes aren't just for moving the assemblage point, but it's all about energy. They're used for accessing different forms of energy. And when you get to that concept, we're talking about the luminous sphere, okay, which is, all of us are a luminous sphere. We are a spirit. We are an energy pattern moving around, back and forth, forward and back through reality, through this worldview, the bunch of luminous spheres, okay? Now, what happens when we get into anxiety or anxious situations, or situations that aren't beneficial to our well-being or whatever, or maybe we just waste a lot of energy doing a certain thing. Anyway, this energy, it cakes on like mud around the luminous sphere. It kind of hangs there and sticks to this luminous sphere instead of flowing and being dispersed. So what some of these magical passes do is grind the energy. In other words, smash the energy. Okay, so there's There's different moves where you swivel on the balls of your feet and your legs are bent. And then there's other moves where you smash with your heel down onto the earth. And then there's other moves where you come out in front of your body and you scoop the energy and then you bring it back and then you go out to the side. You can't see my hand, but I'm scooping the energy and bringing it back in from the luminous sphere that surrounds us. There's those kind of magical passes as well. Now there's, in the book, I mean, there's probably, I don't know, maybe 100, 100 of these things, and each one has different categories where one is intent, one is moving the assemblage point, one is accessing energy, that type of thing. Now you can do these spontaneously, and see, that's another thing I was talking about yesterday. You look at them, you go through, you read, it's like a kung fu manual or whatever. You go through and read what magical pass would be best for you at any given time, and you start practicing that, or one magical pass might jump out at you and feel really good. Oh, by the way, one thing I do want to mention is that when you fix the assemblage point, that's called stalking, okay? When you fix an assemblage point, you're stalking. That's the term for it. That's the term that the shamans give it, stalking. Because you can stay there and you can stalk that point and you can stay with it, or you can stay with that world, or you can stay with that energy pattern. Okay, so where was I? I was to the point of using these magical passes to gain energy, to grind energy, to break it loose, to bring it in. Now, a lot of these same techniques can be found in things like Qigong or Tai Chi or ancient. There's always a correlation. There's always a crossover. I knew that right away the first time I experienced a magical pass or saw it or used it. I knew right away that it had the same kind of properties of certain energy generating techniques like in Qigong, like the hugging of the tree. That's a form of drawing up the energy from the planet, from Mother Earth, a form of Tantra with Mother. So I find that these magical passes are very beneficial, and now I can honestly say that years ago, when the book first came out, I dove into it thoroughly, underlined it, practiced it, did all kinds of things, practiced the magical passes every day for I don't know how long. And it got to be almost like a second nature. Then I put it down, because at some point you do put things down and you come back to them later. You reflect on them and you experience them, and then you might have been in a time in your life where that particular technique wasn't really exactly, how shall I put this? You weren't ready for it. You weren't ready for it, and so you remembered it, and it's ingrained in you. So when you come back to it later, you look at the technique and it becomes easier and you understand it better. And you understand the significance of it. So these are fun things to do. I mean, this goes right along with the changing of consciousness and the transstrumming and everything else that I've ever talked about. All has to do with this type of thing, okay? And so why leave this out? I mean, why not? I'm sitting there the other day and I'm going, magical passes, magical passes. Something is telling me magical passes. I use them as I see fit. And I have, again, there's several in there that you may be going through and looking at these and trying to determine what might be best for you. Well, it will come to you. It will jump out at you. Something will seem kindred almost. Let there be no mistake, though. When we start getting into magical passes, we start getting into the worlds that it is said that sometimes you don't even want to come back from. Okay, because the energy there feels so good and it's so flowing and it's like a place you just want to stay. But in this reality, my suggestion to you is to experiment with some of these magical passes. I think that the book is still available, if I'm not mistaken, on Amazon or places like that. It's a much overlooked book, let's put it that way. A lot of people in the Castaneda circle or the realm or that studied his works, and I read them back when I was in the 60s, okay? Some of them become purists and they go, oh, I don't know, man, that new book, I mean, it's just, is that real or whatever? Doesn't matter if it's real, doesn't fucking matter. If it's there and it's got the name on it and you try them, then you really soon find out real quick that they are real, okay? I can honestly say that when I first started doing these magic, it had a profound effect on my life. Changed my life entirely. Now, did I realize that at the time that I was doing? Well, fuck no. Sometimes you don't realize it till a decade later or years later that you go, oh, wow, you know, I was into this. And in looking back at your life, then you see that when you started doing those at a certain point in your life, your hope, you know, on reflection, or let's say the armchair quarterback view or whatever, you start realizing, oh, wow, my life went through massive changes. My worldview changed, and I went through all kinds of things when I was at the particular time that I was practicing these magical passes. So you pick them up later on in life, and when you pick them up later on in life, then you are aware of how much they can change your life, how much of an effect they have on your life. And you're more ready for it, and you're more open to it, and you're more flexible, okay? More flexible. Flexibility is the key. The snake energy, man, the serpent, you know, the kundalini, the coiled energy. So anyway, I thought I would just briefly touch on some of this stuff. I thought it would be a good follow-up to my last video. You don't want to leave that out of your tools, okay, to be able to access different things. And I don't expect most people will even comprehend half the shit I talk about on here. Sometimes I don't even comprehend it. Sometimes I got to go back and look at the video and go, what was Spirit telling me to talk about today? Or what kind of energy pattern was involved with me disseminating certain information? So anyway, think about that. Think about Castaneda and think about magical passes. And I might teach some on here. There's some that are very simple, but the fact that I'm calling them to your attention should be enough if you want to explore that avenue. There's, again, a way to do that. Go to the book, read the book. Another thing about the book Magical Passes is it's just not a bunch of exercises with pictures, which that's in there as well. Explicit pictures on which way to move and how to do certain things. But there's also explanations. There's a whole, like, almost 2, 3, 4, 5 pages full of explanations and conversations that Castaneda had with the shamans, okay, or with a particular shaman that imparted to him knowledge. And so the knowledge that's in there that is a precursor to, is the start of that chapter before you get into the magical passes, is profound in itself, just reading what they're about and where they come from, and reading the particular conceptions. And I found it in magical passes, actually, the conceptions are more easily understood in a way. Not that anything that Castaneda writes is easily understood. It has to be felt, in the spirit. The spirit has to feel it. It has to be moved. It has to be felt. Anything that, and sometimes it takes years and years and years for stuff to, boom, make sense to you on a feeling level or on an experience level. So anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there today. I don't want to make this video too long, but something to consider, magical passes.